So, welcome to our live training session. In this session, we're going to be talking about prototyping with standard assets. So, the standard assets are a collection of models, scripts, particle systems, other content that is provided by Unity for you to kind of create little projects with, and it ships with Unity. So we're going to take a look at what's in there, how to use the different pieces, and we're going to make a little simple game. You can see here on the screen, I've got Ethan, who's our demo character, being chased by a bunch of other Ethans. There's a fire and some fog and stuff. So we're going to make this thing that you're seeing in the picture using the standard assets over the next hour. So you should be now seeing the Unity editor. And what I've got here is a new empty project with the 3D default selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to import my standard assets. So if you go to Assets, Import Package, you'll see a list of packages here. Now, I'm not going to go through every single package here. Feel free to explore on your own, but I'm going to go through the cameras, characters, we'll use some effects, particle systems, prototyping, and one or two of the utility scripts. So let's just start pulling those in. Pulling the cameras, you just select camera and then hit import. Once it's done thinking about it, we're going to grab the characters. So we've got the cameras, characters. We will grab the effects. So the effects here are some camera effects like bloom and glow, blur, vignetting. We'll put some of those on there just to make our image look a little more fancy. And then the prototyping package that I'm going to grab is just a bunch of basically shapes and objects that we can just use to kind of knock up a level. Oh, let's grab the particle systems as well. The particle systems are kind of fun. It's just a bunch of different particles, like there's fire, smoke, an explosion, a flare, that dust storm you saw in the image. And we'll use some of those. And those are a good way to learn just about how the particle systems work in Unity. And so now that we've got our stuff imported, you'll see we now have this folder called Standard Assets, a folder called Editor that's being created, and then we have these different subfolders with cameras, characters, etc. So what we're going to do first is we're going to set up a little environment. So we're going to go to Prototyping, Prefabs, right? Prototyping, Prefabs, and then we're going to grab some of these objects. We can look at them in the preview. So we have this cube, block. There's like a little floor-shaped thing, a larger floor, a house, and so on. So we're going to grab the floor, drop it in, make sure it's at origin, right, at 0, 0, 0, and then we're going to drop in a house as well. And the house is going to appear at origin, and we're going to highlight it in the hierarchy, select our Move tool, and then I'm holding down Alt and clicking in the viewport to rotate the scene, and I'm just going to grab the red handle to move it horizontally over to the edge, and then the blue handle to move it. So the red handle moves it along the X, and the blue handle moves it along the Z or Z axis. We're going to move it over here to the corner. Then I'm going to highlight it and do Edit, Duplicate. You could also do Control or Command D, depending on if you're on Mac or PC. And we're going to slide it over. Doesn't need to be perfect. And, so the idea is here just to set up a quick environment so that we can start playing around with some mechanics and prototype, right? And so now I'm just repeating the steps here just to lay out a little scene here. And so the idea with prototyping is that you want to kind of test whether an idea is fun or worth pursuing before you go and make a lot of artwork or write a lot of detailed scripts or, basically spend a lot of time on an idea. And this is a kind of an important idea in making games. It's really useful to prototype things before you invest time in them, because everything in games, I don't know why I don't need to do this. Everything in games tends to take a lot of time, and if you can figure out that an idea, like I had an idea once for this racing mechanic where you would, there was 2 tracks above each other and you could flip back and forth between the 2 of them. And I figured out very quickly that I had the camera rotating when you flip tracks, and it immediately made me want to throw up, and like thinking about it in my head, like, oh, it's going to be so cool. The camera's going to be turning. And like, I played it for like 5 minutes once I had it prototyped, and I immediately wanted to throw up. I was like, okay, that idea's out the window, and thankfully I didn't invest a ton of time in it before I figured that out. So it's kind of the value of prototyping. So, all right, so we've got a little environment here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a empty game object and call it environment. This is just kind of like a folder object that's going to hold our environment. Make sure your environment is at 000 when you create it. And if it's not, you can use the component context menu to reset it. And then we're just going to grab, I'm holding down Shift and clicking to select all of these objects that we just placed. And then I'm just going to drag them and put them on our environment. And don't worry about, copying what I've done here or anything. It's just a a little space for us to run around in. So, and then we can fold this up, right? Just to keep the hierarchy nice and tidy. All right, so now we've got a little scene, right? We want to be able to run around in it, right? And so we're going to take a look at the characters folder here. Now we've got 3 different subfolders in characters. We've got first person character, which contains a prefabs folder with 2 character controllers in it. We've got an FPS controller and a rigid body FPS controller. So this is a distinction worth making. So the FPS controller, if we highlight it, we can see it has a character controller component. The character controller component is part of the physics system, and it's designed to give you kind of basic first-person walking functionality. Let's toss it in and test it out. The thing that, and so notice this landed not at 000, right? So let's reset the position. The thing about using the character controller component is that it doesn't respond to physics in the sort of normal way that other rigid body objects do. And that's actually a feature, not a bug, right? Most of the time, you don't actually want, and let's move our character up a little bit so they're not stuck in the ground. Height of about 1 should be good. You don't normally want your character controller to be behaving in a physically accurate physics sense. Instead, you want them to kind of behave like a video game character is expected to behave. So now we see we can walk around. We can look at these mysterious barns here. Look up at the beautiful skybox. Now notice we're getting a warning down here saying there are 2 audio listeners in the scene. What this means is that, let's exit play mode, the main camera and the FPS controller both have cameras attached to them, right? And so if we have 2 audio listeners, that is something that Unity doesn't like, right? So we are going, because we don't know which one we're supposed to be listening to. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete the main camera. I'll highlight it and delete it. And so in the first person character controller, we have a number of variables. We can control the walk speed, the run speed, the step length, jump speed, the force with which they stick to the ground. We can change the gravity if we want. We have some parameters for the mouse look, how sensitive the speed that the camera rotates when we move the mouse is. Here we have an FOV kick. This is if actually I forget how this works. I think if you start running, it changes the field of view. Let's take a look. Yeah, you can see it. The field of view shifts a little bit when you start running. Head bob, jump bob, right? So the camera will move up and down a little bit if we've got the head bob. So like if we, and it's doing a little sort of sinusoidal bobbing movement to make it a little more realistic. And then we have some footstep sounds that play, and you can change all these and season to taste, right? And then there's an audio source that's playing the sound. So this is our first controller. The only thing that can take a little getting used to with this is that the character controller does not by default, you can't use things like on trigger enter and on collision enter don't always behave exactly the way that you would expect with the character controller, because it has its own collider built in. Notice there isn't a collider anywhere on this object. So if you want to use those things, another option, I'm going to delete the FPS controller here. Another option is the rigid body FPS controller, which basically does a lot of the same things, but uses instead a custom rigid body. It has a rigid body, and then there's a rigid body first person controller script, which if you'll look has many of the same settings that the character controller does, but instead achieves those using the physics system. And so the behavior is largely the same, right? Oh, I spawned inside that building. Whoops. In this case, I guess it's not playing this one doesn't have the sounds. It's not playing the footstep sounds. So that's different. I think it used to, actually. I don't know if that's changed recently. Anyway, so these are kind of two different options that you have for first-person walking type games, right? And I use these things all the time. If I'm just knocking up little prototypes and I'm going to have some kind of first-person mechanic, I just drop one of these in there, start walking around, right? And sometimes I'll tweak the variables if I want it to move slower or faster. You can do that, and I tend to use the rigid body FPS controller a lot because sometimes I want to, do certain collisions or add forces or whatever, and I find that the rigid body FPS controller makes that relatively easy. Okay, so let's actually take that out for now because we're going to do a third-person game. So let's go back to standard assets. We're going to go to characters. Let's go to third-person character. Excuse me. And we'll go to prefabs, right? Prefabs is always the first place you want to go because it contains basically the finished product, right? All of these other folders, animation, materials, models, are all the pieces that get put together in the prefab to make the finished character, right? So let's start with the third-person controller. Drop that in. Here he is. We can push F to frame selected and zoom in. This is our boy Ethan here. And so you can see he's got a rigid body, a capsule collider, and then a third-person user control script and a third-person character script with a number of variables as well. And he's also rigged up. If we look, there's the body, but he's also got a skeleton with all his bones and so on that we need to do his animation. He's got glasses. And so if we put him in and play, we get this, right? We don't have a camera. And so this is one of the things that's different about the third-person controller is that it doesn't come with a camera by default. And that is intentional because there are a number of different ways that we could approach the camera for this. So we've got our character in, but we don't have a camera to look at the scene, right? So let's go over to our cameras folder, prefabs, and we've got 4 different cameras here. Let's take a look first at the multi-purpose camera rig. So we drop this in, and we can see it's got a rigid body, which means it's going to move, right? We have this protect camera from wall clip script, protect camera from wall clip script that is currently deactivated. What this is designed to do is to stop the camera from going through the walls in the level. You've certainly, if you've played video games, you've seen this happen before. It's something that everybody who programs cameras tries to make not happen, and that often ends up happening anyway because the player gets into a corner or crawls into something, and and the camera goes through the wall and it looks terrible. But so we're going to try to prevent that from happening using this. I'll keep it off for a second, then I'll turn it on in a moment. And then we have this auto cam script. Now the auto cam script is going to follow the player and look at the player, right? Now what we need to do is we need to tell the camera what to look at, right? And if we look, we've got the rig, right, which is the rigid body and the movement scripts. And then we've got a pivot, which allows us to set the rotation and distance of the camera. And then we actually have the camera itself, right? So we have the rig, the pivot, and the camera. And so notice that in this case, putting the rig in at 0, the pivot is 3 units back from where the rig is and 2 units up, right? So it's behind and up. And then the camera is a little bit further back still. So the rig is actually right here, right on top of the player, and that's because we're going to use, the rig is actually going to follow the player, and the camera is going to rotate and try to keep the player in view. So what we need to do is we need to tell the rig what to follow, right? Now there's 2 ways we can do that. One is that we just take the third-person controller and drag it to this target slot, right? So now we're saying the target that you want to look at is the transform of this third-person controller, and that will work. But I'm going to undo that. There's an easier way to do this, and that will get easier as we change through our different cameras, which is, if you'll notice, the auto cam script has a field here called auto target player, which is on by default. What this means is it's going to look for an object in the scene with the tag player and then focus on it. So what we need to do is we're just going to take our third-person controller and set the tag to player, which is one of the default tags that we have in the tag menu, and tag that with player. And now, because auto target player is on in our auto cam script, it's just going to find the object with the tag player, which in this case is our player, our third-person controller, and then start following it. So now if we play, we can walk and run in a circle, and you can see our camera follows the player, and it rotates to try to keep sort of basically behind the player. Now this can get a little hairy. Right now I have the protect wall clip script off. That is a mouthful. Let's see. Well, I didn't succeed there in breaking it. Let's go around another corner. This is a decent example of where you might run into problems. So let's get right up against the wall. Go around the corner fast. Burp, right? Whoops. So if we turn the protect camera from wall script on and try that again, it still breaks. Yay! Software development, folks. That was terrible. What a terrible example. Woohoo! Let's see if it can handle this. Go around the corner. Nope. This goes right through the wall. Well then. So that's great. Well done. The goal is to keep it from going through the wall. Burp. Burp. But if you do it too fast, yeah, it just goes right through the wall. Yeah, that's not working. Okay, but anyway, so what this is going to do is try to follow behind and above the player. But yeah, so basically this is, and we can choose, like if we want to change how close it's following, we could adjust the pivot, right? Make it tighter. It's probably going to give us more clipping problems. Tighter and lower here, right? And that's just by moving the pivot's relationship to the rig, right? We could make it wider and higher, etc. Right? And then we could change the speed with which it follows. The move speed, the turn speed, the roll speed, follow velocity, etc. So this is kind of like a general purpose, multi-purpose camera rig, which is fine for many cases. I'm going to show you two others and the one we're actually going to use. So we've got, let's look at the other one we're not going to use, which is the CCTV camera. This one's kind of fun actually and could work for this game. It can work nicely for any type of game where you have a more or less fixed field of view. So basically what this does, let's reset the transform. I'm going to put it not right there. Let's put it up a little bit. Let's put it up 10 units. Oops, what happened there? Oh, it's disabled. Let's turn it on. So, oh, did I not set the, should be auto-targeting the player, or is it just because he's right under there? Let's see, let's move him forward a little. Yeah, so as you can see, there was something a little weird there in the beginning. I'm not quite sure what was happening, but basically it's as if it's up on a pole and it's gonna look at the player. Now we do get into situations like this where we can go off over here and get lost, right? One thing that I was messing with, it's more work than is worth showing for this little demo, but I did a click to move script. If you saw my previous live training about click to move, it uses the nav mesh and you click on a point on the ground and the player moves there. That actually worked nicely with this camera because you can't click on points you can't see. So he can't walk to places that you can't see. Like he can't walk over here. You could click there, but then you'd be clicking on the wall. So that was kind of a good combination. I'm not gonna get into it here, but it could work. There's still, whoa, see, yeah, it gets confused when you get in the blind spot. So you might want to put like a post or something there to prevent him from getting into the blind spot of the camera. But kind of nice. And there is also this handheld camera. This one, to be honest, I don't totally get the point of, but I'll show you. Drop it in. Let's reset it. Let's put it kind of like behind the player looking at him. And again, now we're just using auto target player, right? Because we tagged our player, so I don't have to keep setting the transform. And of course, it's disabled. Let's turn it on. Basically, this gives us a kind of shaky cam. Let's see. This should be. What's going on here? Let's make it higher. See, I haven't got the shot right. Let's make it a little higher. So as you can see, we get this kind of, we stop and we move and we get this shaky vision. His head is cut off and we're clipping through the floor. But anyway, you get the idea. This, whoa, I don't see tons of uses for it in modern games, but maybe if you were going to make like a video game of the Blair Witch Project, that might be helpful. All right, so now I'm going to delete that out. The one that we're actually going to use is this free look camera rig. So what this does is it's similar to the multi-purpose camera rig, but it lets us rotate the camera by moving the mouse. And initially, this rotation is quite slow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the smoothing to 0. So it's just going to really turn in like a 1-to-1 way. So now we can really look around quickly. And what's kind of fun about this is Ethan is programmed to always move forward. So I'm actually just holding down W and rotating the camera, and he's running around, right? So that's kind of fun. So we're going to use this for our game. And this is kind of similar to, you know, third-person role-playing games. You've probably seen a camera that's quite a bit like this kind of orbiting camera. This is not, it's not locked to the player. You can see the player can kind of walk. It is possible to walk off camera like that. You have to keep rotating it. So it's not like strict. You can also go down, look up. And this is locked. You can get this far or this far. Get closer. Look at that guy, so handsome. And you can adjust that here in the tilt if we wanted to. This is not really a gameplay use for this, right? Or maybe some creative person will come up with a gameplay use. We could go, whoop, hello there. I'm upside down. Make your audience throw up. Whoop, I'm behind you. The maximum tilt there, and then you can also set the minimum, right, which is the low angle, but the default of 75 is pretty good. And then we could also lock the cursor, which actually probably you want to do in this case, so that your cursor, it depends on if you're clicking or something. You might be doing something else with the cursor, but locking the cursor just hides the cursor so that you don't have it zipping around the view. So I thought that was kind of fun and a little bit different, right, than people may or may not be using already in their games. So we're going to do something with that. So that's our camera setup. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Ooh, my gosh, a half hour already. Wow, that's intense. Okay, so let's keep going. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add in some enemies, and we're going to do this using the other character we have, which is the other third-person prefab, which is the AI third-person controller. So let's drop him in. It's another Ethan, and we're going to have lots of Ethans in this game. And so what the difference about the AI third-person controller is that he has a nav mesh agent and an AI character control instead of the third-person user control, right? So they're both using the third-person character script, but one has a user input for where he's going to go, and the other one has the AI character control, which uses the nav mesh agent to determine where he can walk and where he can't walk. And so we're going to bake a quick nav mesh for our scene. So I'm just going to highlight my environment with everything in it, go up here to the static flags, and I'm going to choose navigation static, and then I'm going to say yes, change children. So we're going to set the static flag for all of our environment geometry to navigation static. So choose yes, change children. This is under here, right? Static, navigation static. You can also just click the checkbox, but that's going to try to build the light maps as well, which may take a while, so I'm not going to do that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and do window navigation down here at the bottom, which will open the navigation tab. Go to bake, and then hit bake. Oh, I need to save my scene, which you guys should do as well. I'm going to call this main. And as we can see, this blue geometry appears. This is showing us where the walkable areas in our scene are. So now our enemies will be able to walk on the blue areas. If they could get up to the roofs, they would walk there. And so this is what's called a nav mesh. There is a variety of content that uses nav mesh. There's something about it in my click to move training, and there's some stuff about it in the survival shooter project if you want to learn more about it. So feel free to check that out. But in this case, all we need to do is set the flag to static and hit bake, and then we're going to return. And now our nav mesh agent has something to walk on. It knows what is walkable. And then in the, where is it? In the AI character control script, we have a target variable, right? This is just like we had in the cameras, where whatever the target is, it's going to try to follow. So let's put him a little further away and drag in our third-person controller and play. And we'll see he's going to run and he's going to push him, right? So he's going to try to get to where the target is as fast as possible. Now, since we don't want him to just run up on him all the time like that, we're going to slow his speed. So let's slow him down to like 0.7. So now Ethan can run. Evil Ethan cannot run. So he's got a chance. Good Ethan has a chance. Let's make good Ethan maybe. Maybe we'll make evil Ethan another color. Let's go to, what's his material on his model? It's Ethan Gray. Okay, so let's find Ethan Gray. Edit, duplicate, and this will be Ethan, maybe, let's make him red. So I'm just going to change the albedo color to a nice sinister red color, and then drag that Ethan red onto Ethan body. There we go. Whoa, scary. Okay, so now we've got evil Ethan and good Ethan, and then the next thing that we're going to do is I'm just going to do Control D, 1, select those both, Control D again, 2, and again we're going to make like a whole swarm of evil Ethans. And remember, I already set the target in the initial copy, right? So these guys are all going to chase good Ethan now. Let's see how that looks. Whoa. Run away. Yeah, so kind of fun. Oh, they're so sinister. I should probably make them like a little more red and less pink, right? If I really want them to be scary. They're like Ethan flamingos right now. It's a John Waters film. Okay, so let's save our scene just for good practices. Let me take a couple of questions and then I will keep going. Okay, some people talking about the static flag. Yeah, so the static flag basically means this is going to be non-moving geometry. So it's not going to be a character, it's not going to be a pickup or something, or a moving platform. It means it's not going to move. And there are a lot of systems that do different sort of optimizations based on the fact that it's not going to move. So one example is the navigation system, right, where it's going to build a map of where the level is at and what is not going to move, and then say these are the parts that you can walk on and these are the parts that you can't. Another example is in baking light maps, which is a map of where the light and the shadows can go in the level, or where light bounces in the level. In that case, you're going to need to mark your geometry as static as well so that it can pre-compute the lighting data before, so we don't have to do it at runtime, right, which would be computationally intense. The original asks, can the camera be used in your own commercial games? Absolutely. That is the point of all this stuff. This is free stuff made by us here at Unity that you can and should use in your commercial and non-commercial games, right? This is all free stuff that's totally free to use. All right, so let's continue. So we've got our player and camera and enemies chasing him. Now we're just going to do a little decoration. We're going to use some particle systems. This is just kind of a fun one. If we look in the particle systems folder under prefabs, there's a bunch of fun pre-created particles. I'm going to start by putting in this dust storm. Ooh, spooky. So this is a pre-created particle system, right, which is like the size of the whole level, and is just playing these clouds of dust. And this stuff can be kind of useful to look at. You can look at the settings for the particles and decide and learn about how the particle system works and customize it for your own particles. You could replace the texture, or maybe we could change the color. Let's change the color. Let's make it like a creepy red mist. Like oh, too creepy, right? Let's not do that. Too creepy, too scary. I have to put that on after 9 o'clock. Let's just go with some, maybe make it like more white. There we go. All right, so let's throw in our dust storm, and then I'm also going to throw in a smoke. And let's zoom in. I'm using F to frame selected and then zooming in with the mouse wheel. So here we have this smoke particle system. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to have it so that the player, there's going to be a couple of these smoking locations, and the player has to run to it. And then when the player runs onto it, it will turn into a fire. And the fire looks like this. I'll put one in to begin with. Let's get a fire complex. I'm going to put it right here in the middle of let's put it between our player and the enemies. And so if we play our scene, we can see our fire complex. Oh, it's kind of stuck in the floor a little bit. Leave me alone, just leave me alone. It got pushed down a little. Let's push it up. There we go. Somewhere just above the floor. Notice it's got a light attached to it, so it's going to cast a little light on the player and the scene. which is kind of nice. And it's got its own smoke and fire. This looks kind of cool. It doesn't do anything to anybody, right? We would have to write our own scripts to make people catch on fire when they run through it, which might be kind of fun. Okay, so let's do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set up some interaction on this smoke. So this is a fun, just for those of you guys who are not programmers, maybe you're a music composer or a level designer, there are still some things that you can do interaction-wise using some of these standard asset scripts. Oh, it zooms way out when I frame selected on it. Okay. So, there we go. And if you want to just move around in the scene view, you can use the arrow keys as well. So, okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to add one of the scripts from the utilities folder, utility folder, which is called activate trigger. So this is kind of fun. So this is just a really simple script that allows us to do something when an object collides with the trigger attached to this. Now, right now we don't have a trigger yet, so let's add one first. So let's go ahead. Well, let's just add the script since I'm here, right? We'll drag the script on, and now we're going to click Add Component. There it is, because I was doing it before. And then if you just type, well, we'll navigate to it. We'll go to Physics, Sphere Collider, right? And so we're just going to add, for some reason it starts huge, probably because of the size of the particle system. Let's just make it a size of 1 and reset the offset as well. There we go. Okay, so it should be 0, 0, 0, 1, right? So this is just a little invisible sphere that if we walk into it, it will do the action. Now, the important thing we need to do is make it a trigger, right? Because right now our player is going to bounce off of this. It's like an invisible force field. We're going to make it a trigger. That means that the player can walk through it and any of the moving objects in the game can pass through it, but it will still register that trigger collision, right? And so now that means that this activate trigger will do an action when we walk through the trigger. And what we want to do is we have a number of things here. Trigger will send a message, which we could use to call functions on other scripts. Replace will turn off the target object and instantiate a new prefab, and that's what we're actually going to use. There's also activate, which will set, if we have an object that's inactive, that's like deactivated by clicking on the active checkbox, it will reactivate it. We also have a enable, which will turn on a certain component, right? We could turn on, let's say, the renderer, if we want to have the renderer turn on. We can enable, I just said enable, which will enable a component, animate, play an animation, or deactivate, which will set the active state to off, right? Turn off the object. So let's go ahead and choose replace. The target is going to be this smoke object. We're going to deactivate the smoke object, and then we are going to instantiate a complex fire prefab. So I'm just going to click on the circle select button here and choose fire complex. So now what's going to happen is, and I just want to check one thing. Okay, there's something weird. For some reason, these come in rotated 270 degrees around X. I don't know why that is, but I'm going to reset it. So we're going to reset the rotation of this smoke so it's not turned on its side, because otherwise our fire would be turned on its side when we walk into it. And so that's basically it. So and then there's also the trigger count. We could say we require this trigger to be pressed 3 times or something. I'm just going to keep the trigger count to 1. And now if we run, I should probably put the smoke a little above the floor. We can see it turns off the smoke and starts the fire. Run away. Oh, and one thing we should note, see, look, it goes away. All of these particle systems, or at least the fire and smoke, they all have a component on them, particle system destroyer. So this just means randomly between 8 and 10 seconds after the game starts, they're going to get deactivated. So we're just going to remove that component from that, from the smoke, and from, I'll do it to the fire complex prefab. I'll just turn it off. Let's go to fire complex and turn off particle system destroyer. That would be like if you had, let's say, bullet hits or blood spatters, you probably would want to turn them off automatically because you just want to play them for a second. But since these are like part of our level, we don't want to do that. So now let's test it again. Oh, let me just move the smoke up a little higher. Smoke, yeah, it's a little low. Let's set it to 0. I think that should be good. It's still going through the floor a little bit. That's a little too high. Let's try like 0.4, 0.34, something like that. Anyway, these are details. It's better. Okay. There we go. There's our starting fire. Okay, cool. So now I'm just going to make a couple copies of this. We could make this into a prefab if we wanted to. I'm not going to bother with that for now. I'm just going to duplicate it in the scene. Well, we might as well actually, right? Let's show some best practices. We'll make a new folder called prefabs instead of me just being lazy. And we'll put our smoke in there. We'll call it smoke trigger, just so we can differentiate. All right, and now I'm just going to hit Command D, Control D rather, since I'm on PC, and I'm going to put one over here, and I'm going to put one over here, and I'm going to put one in here. And I'm going to put one in here. Okay, so Ethan's got to run to all these smoke points, turn on all the fires, right? And then we could show like a dialog box saying you win. I don't think I'm going to get to that, but that's the idea. Okay, so let's give that a test. I might want to speed up the enemies, right? Make it a little scarier. That's still pretty good. Oh, we got him. So I'm going to use that same trigger script to make it so that if they touch him, he's going to get deactivated, which we'll do in a second. So I have like a death thing. Yeah, let's get this one first. Okay, so that seems to be working, right? Very nice. A little simple. You can see the fire billboarding. This is not the best angle to view it at, right? Whoopsie. Woof. He got me. All right, I would have died there. Wasting time looking at the fire. Hooray. All right, so let's do our last little interaction, which is going to be that we're going to add two, and actually let's do this. Let's make a prefab out of our third-person control, and let's call them enemy. And let's make a prefab out of that because I'm going to make changes to one and I don't want to bother copying to make changes to the other. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add a trigger to this. So we're going to add a sphere collider. So it has its own capsule collider for its collision, but we're going to add another sphere collider and set it to 1. And let's offset it up a little bit. Something like that. Yeah, actually, let's make it smaller, right? That's going to make it too easy for them. Let's set it to 0.5. There we go. So now, if that trigger touches Ethan, we're going to deactivate him. And so let's add our utility activate trigger to the enemy. And then we're going to say replace. Again, the target is going to be our third-person controller, and the source, the thing we're going to replace, is going to be an explosion. And oh, I've got an extra copy here. Let's get rid of that. And let's give that a try. And let's make him a little faster too. was a little too slow there. Speed will be maybe 0.8. So the speed is just the speed of the nav mesh agent. So let's see. So now, we could add a sound effect too, right? He's dead. And let's apply the changes to the prefab, right? And now that's saved in our prefab in our project. And let's just duplicate him out again. 2, 4, 6, 8. I'm just doing Control D to duplicate those. All right, and last but not least, I'm just going to change the lighting a little bit to make this look a little more scary. So let's just go ahead and take our free look camera rig and go to the camera component. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the clear flags to solid color so that it's going to be this kind of dark, foggy gray color. And I'm going to save, actually I'm going to use this color preset that I have here. So, but to save a color preset, right, we could just click Add New Preset. This is kind of useful when you're working with colors. So I'm going to set the background color to that, and then I'm going to go to Window, Lighting, set the ambient source. So this is the light that's kind of coming from all directions. By default, it's the skybox, which is why everything has a little kind of bluish tone to it. We're going to set it to a color, which is our color there. And we're going to set the ambient intensity to 0.3. So we're going to lower it. So, whoops, that didn't work. So it's going to be a little darker. And then we're going to turn on some fog, which is going to be the same color. There we go. And then, get that. What was the other thing? Oh yeah, the light. I'm going to go to the light, the directional light. This is the sun light that's always in the scene, in a 3D scene by default. I'm going to change the color to our same color, right? And having a gray colored light is a weird idea, right? But anyway, it's fine. And then I'm going to take the intensity and also put it to like 0.3. Spooky. We'll lower the bounce intensity as well. All right. It's funny, I feel like I'm not seeing my fog. Did I turn the fog on? Maybe I need to make it more foggy. Yeah, it's on. Huh. Let's try it. It blew up right away. Whoops. Let's move him forward a little bit. Wait, what's happening? Oh, they're colliding with each other. Okay, so the thing that we need to do... That's funny. This didn't happen when I was testing before. Oh, maybe I only tested with one guy. All right, let's take our enemy prefab, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a child object, create empty child. I think I only tested this with one agent. This is bad screencaster, no cookie. Let's copy the component. Paste component is new. And we're going to copy the, basically I'm going to put this on a separate layer so they don't trigger each other. Let's copy this component, the activate trigger, and then we'll remove both of these. Remove, and game object. Paste component is new. So I'm going to put this is going to be on another layer, which we'll call enemy trigger. And then we're just going to say in the physics settings that these guys are going to have to be on their own layer too. Ugh, this is probably needlessly complicated. We'll make the enemies on the enemy layer, the triggers on the trigger layer, and the enemy is going to go on the enemy layer. No, don't change the children because this is on a different layer. This is going to be on the enemy trigger layer. And then under project settings, physics, we're going to say enemy trigger and enemy. So this is a matrix of what is allowed to collide with what, right? So the enemies can collide with the enemies. Yes, that's true. We want their bodies to be able to collide, but we don't want the triggers to collide with the enemy bodies. So we're going to turn that off, and hopefully that will cause it to work. Nope. All right, you know what? Let's see. Oh, because I didn't. Okay, so let's do that, and then let's apply the changes to the prefab. So now they all should change. Nope. What am I missing here? The enemy. This is on enemy. It's got the capsule collider. Is it colliding with the floor? Let me just delete these extras. Let me turn off these extras for a second. So it works with one. What? These guys. Component is taken off. I think maybe their triggers are colliding with each. Oh, okay, so let's do this. We'll do edit, project settings, physics, and the enemy trigger cannot collide with the enemy trigger. Let's see if that does it. We'll turn one back on. There we go. All right. Derp. Should have tested that with all of them in there. All right, so there we go. We've got our kind of spooky scene here with our fires, our enemies chasing our player, our fires that we have to ignite. Whoop, 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 whoop. Let's see if I can do it. And so hopefully, whoop, woo, ha! Hopefully this has given you some ideas for your own games and giving you a look at some of the things that we have here in terms of prototyping tools, you know, things that you can play around with that you can definitely use for your own commercial projects if you want to. And yeah, thanks for watching. What happened there? I wonder, did they collide with the... I think he collided with the environment. Let's make him not collide with the environment either. Let's set the environment. Well, here's a little look at tags and layers, right? So, or layers. Let's make another tag, another layer called environment, and we'll put the environment on that. Environment, yes, change children, and then I was doing so well there. Enemy trigger does not collide with the environment. Let's try that. Let's just go a different way this time. Let's see if I can make it over here. So I will say thank you to Adam Buckner for helping out with the chat. It allowed me to speed through my material. I actually thought I had less material than I did, but it turned out to actually take the full hour. I'm going to hang out in the chat now and take some questions. So stick around. And to the, if you're leaving now, thanks for joining us. Welcome to all the new folks. And welcome back to all the regulars. It's great to see you as usual. Whoa, 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 I'm alive. Did I get that one? No, this one I'm missing, right? I got that one. This one I didn't get. Anyway, it seems to be working, right? Hooray! Celebratory jump into nothingness. Excellent. So, there you go. All right, so let's take some questions. So, yeah, somebody's asking, couldn't you just check the tag of the player? You definitely could. What I was trying to do here was to do this all with the pre-created scripts, right? If you're going to write your own scripts, of course, you could just write a script that says, you know, if the thing you collided with is tagged, only do this if the thing you collided with is tagged player. I just wanted to show, it got a little lame there at the end because I had to do the layers thing that was not as elegant as I was hoping for. I forgot about them colliding with each other. But, you know, I just wanted to show that some of the uses for that activate trigger thing, just for the folks who are like level designers and stuff and, you know, don't know how to script yet, that they can make some interaction too. Monotonist asks, are there 2D player assets, 2D prototyping assets too? Yeah, there's a... If we go to assets, import package 2D, there is a whole folder of 2D stuff. I kind of focused on the 3D stuff, but there is a bunch of sprites and some scripts as well. I'll show you what's in there in a second. We've got camera 2D follow, camera follow, platformer 2D user control, platformer character 2D, scripts, some prefabs for some characters and crates and things, and then a bunch of different sprites, kind of like similar in style to the standard asset stuff. And there's also on the asset store. Now this is worth mentioning, right? There's a bunch of other stuff too that's free on the asset store. So there are more free assets than just what I've showed you here. If we go to the asset store and we go to the publisher Unity Technologies, all of this stuff is free. You can actually get this as a package from the asset store. This is the same stuff. There's the survival shooter, space shooter, 2D roguelike that I did. Just a quick plug for this. This is a new thing that we did. VR samples, which is a bunch of sample projects that you can build and run on the Gear VR or Oculus Rift to check out how you do VR stuff. And that's got a bunch of like very optimized low poly models and stuff in there, which you can play with as well. You could just take the models if you want and get the spaceship or whatever. Yeah, so all of this stuff is free for you to use, and believe me, people take it and use it all the time. Some guy took the survival shooter project and just basically changed it a little bit to make it into like a VR game and has been selling it, which we sort of don't really admire or respect, but you are allowed to do it. So yeah, that's a little lame to me, just taking the project and publishing it. But like this 2D roguelike thing that I made, there's a guy who did like a Fallout 2 kind of like fan game, 2D Fallout game using the code base of that, which was awesome. And some people who reskinned it and did that, and I'm totally cool with that stuff. It's just a little lame to me if you don't change it at all and you republish it. But all of this stuff is here for you to use, including in your commercial projects. 60 NoyPL asks, if I want to export this game to Android, what should I do? Should I change all of the stuff that's not for mobile? Yeah, what you want to take a look at, I didn't really have time to get into it this time, but if you look at the cross-platform input package, I'll pull it in. You'll see that there are, in here, we have things like dual touch controls. So what these allow you to do are, it's a mobile control rig, and I believe the assets in the standard assets should work with this. So let me see if I turn it on. Can I turn it on? No. What are these not on? Let me turn these on. I'm not sure. But basically, yeah, there are, and there's also, what is it, single stick control is another mobile controller. So it's a UI object. But to be honest, I haven't actually worked with these a ton. Not sure why I can't turn them on right now. I think maybe because the build target is not mobile. Hold on, let me just try to change build targets and see. To be perfectly honest, let's try to change to Android. Oh, shoot. Okay, well, this is worth mentioning. So one of the things about 5.3, to lower the installer size, we have removed a bunch of the build targets from the installer. So you don't install all of these platforms if you don't necessarily need them. So I think I must have just installed Windows for 5.3. Yeah. I did WebGL and OSX, but I didn't do Android. All right. So yeah, I can't do that right now. But basically, take a look at that cross-platform input controller, and that should help. Okay. Okay. Just reading. Hopefully, Sarthax95. Take a look at the car tilt control. He asks, is there a standard asset for taking the accelerometer input from the mobile held at a tilted axis? I believe that's the car tilt controls one. So take a look at that.